Classification is an essential element of Paralympic sport. We can't have a Paralympic Games without classification. It identifies which impairments are and are not eligible to compete in Paralympic sport and places athletes into groups for competition. Classification measures the impact of impairment on the outcome of competition, and it varies from sport to sport. Some sports have lots of classes, such as athletics and swimming, whereas some other sports, just like powerlifting, just have the one class. One thing that all Paralympic athletes have in common is they've all been through the classification process to be allocated a sports class. There's 3 stages of that process. The first one involves medical diagnostic information being submitted to the governing body. The governing body would then review that information and make sure the athlete met the minimum impairment criteria for that sport. Once the athlete had passed that check, they'd be invited to go along to classification, and at that stage they would meet the classifiers. The classifiers would act normally in panels of at least 2 and put the athlete through a series of pre-arranged tests. Sometimes they're very clinical tests, just measuring what the body can and can't do, and other times the tests actually replicate what happened on the field of play in sport. Misrepresentation is when an athlete looks to abuse the classification system to gain a competitive advantage, and the sanctions for that, if caught, are very severe. The maximum sanction an athlete can face is up to 4 years, and then for a second offence, if you come back from that 4-year ban, it's a lifetime ban. The ban also can apply to athlete support personnel, so any coaches or medics encouraging or supporting athletes to intentionally misrepresent can also face a sanction. The UK Athlete Classification Code defines responsibilities for classification in this country, both for organisations such as the British Paralympic Association and the sport's national governing bodies, and athlete support personnel. It implements the roles and responsibilities of the IPC Athlete Classification Code on a national level. And the number 1 athlete responsibility in the code is to give a true reflection of their impairment during the classification process. Because classification rules are specific to each sport, the first protocol for any questions for an athlete should be the national governing body. They should be able to define what the minimum impairment criteria for the sport is and the classification structure for that sport. If the athlete does not have confidence in the answer they've got from the governing body, they can email classification@paralympics.org.uk. That comes into the British Paralympic Association, and we can signpost from there. And the British Athletes Commission can also provide independent, neutral support and advice to athletes in classification and other areas as well. Because classification is quite impactful on athletes, it's always a subject of gossip, whether that's on a training camp or competitions or just between athletes in general. However, I'd always be wary of information that you get during that gossip, because elements of the classification process must remain confidential. The medical diagnostic information that gets submitted must remain confidential between the athlete, the governing body and the athlete's doctor. And the only people that actually know what happened during the classification process are the 2 classifiers that were in the room with the athlete and the athlete support personnel. The only way to be allocated a sports class is to go through the full classification process, and it's often not possible to see the extent of an athlete's impairment just by looking at them train, warm up or compete. And quite often the classifiers only find out the full extent of the athlete's impairment by putting them through the classification process and actually physically laying hands on the athlete.